Greetings students, I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course, and today we are going to focus on Module 9, Part 2. So as you know, Module 9 basically focuses on regional conflicts, and if you recall, Module 9, Part 1 focused on the so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, which if you remember has different layers. In this particular module, we focus on the other major, conflict in the area, and these conflicts are around what we call the Persian Gulf. Okay, so in this very relatively small area, there have been a number of conflicts. Very very significant conflict that has not been limited to only the regional participant, but it has actually brought the attention of outside powers, global powers, both strategic powers, political powers, and of course what? Military and economic powers. So, having said that one, I would like to, as you can see from our PowerPoint, I start with that one and then I go more to this. You know that, for example, our PowerPoint is going to be a simple point scale, starting with introduction, going to Iran as a regional superpower, because you will see why we focus on Iran on this one. Then we talk about the politics of the war in the Persian Gulf area. Then we focus on the political strategies and political development in the Persian Gulf area. And last but not least, what? We conclude. So, having said this one, as always, we start with introduction, remember? So, in introduction, we owe our audience to know why they should waste their time and think about this topic. So in other words, we focus on the significance or importance of that. And that is associated with the notion of political realities, Gulf state success, and some of the Gulf states' problems. So let me first of all show you a little bit about this area. This is a very nice Google map of the political area. This is the Persian Gulf. That is through Strait of Hormuz is connected to the Gulf of Oman, and Gulf of Oman, leads into the Arabian Sea, and Arabian Sea is a part of what? A part of the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean is very significant because in terms of trade is the busiest ocean in the world, because everything between east and west goes through Indian Ocean. All right, and as you know, the Persian Gulf is very important because Persian Gulf is one of the major centers for what? For oil and gas. So there are huge tankers that internationally they come. Some of them are so large they cannot even go to Suez Canal. So they come all the way from south. They go to what? They go through Gulf of Oman, and then I'm going to show you this one here. Here, actually, this is a much better one. Is that right? Gulf of Oman. As you can see, it looks like a lot of water, but for a big tanker, you can't get too close to the land because that water is shallow, too shallow for a super tanker. So as you can see right there, it beautifully shows the what? The traffic of the super tankers. This side with the arrow, from the Gulf of Oman going to the Persian Gulf, this side goes in, is that right? Just like, on the roads that we have one side going in, one side returning, and then this side with that arrow closer to what? To the, by the way, notice that there is this side of the peninsula right there actually belongs to Oman. So really the, Strait of Hormuz are being watched by two major powers, Iran and what? Oman. So people, they think, oh, UAE has something to do with it. UAE had some island that we can talk about those things later on, These islands of Tomb of, the Great and Little Tomb and things like that. But, really, these two countries are monitoring it with their navy. Okay, so see how important that is? All that oil going there, all that, merchandise coming out, things like that is very important because the world nowadays is addicted to oil and gas. And until there's finally some alternative source of energy that, they would replace that, this is it. That's what we have to deal with, okay? So that makes this region very, very important. And as you can see, the countries around it very important. Now, you see right there, so we talked about significance, political reality. The political reality in this situation right now is everything has changed. Iran in 1979 goes to a revolution. So from a super friendly country to the US becomes first a neutral country and then now became later on an adversary. Okay? And in fact, 45 years ago, Iran was the only country in the that US had what? Two bases. One in south in the area of Bahar and one in north in the Iranian Azerbaijan. In the northern part, it was watching the movement of the Russian troops, and in the south, it was watching the movement of Russian ships in the Indian Ocean. So, here we go. Fast forward 45 years, Iran is the only country in the area that doesn't have an American base. All those other countries that before they were refusing, now they have American bases. From Kuwait to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, all of them they do, Iraq, etc. Okay? All right. Having said that one, we talked about the political realities. Gulf states have succeeded to use the petrodollar for economic development. So when you go to many of these countries, like for example, everybody talks about what? Dubai, UAE, etc. Oh my gosh, the roads are modern, the buildings are modern, everything is modern. If you're missing some, for example, snow, you go to a place that it creates artificial snow, and then you can even ski. You can ski in UAE in some of the areas. Not outside though; it's an inside thing. So here is a lot of money over there. Okay, and also it's hosting has become like the modern version of Beirut. They used to call Beirut the Paris of the Middle East. Now Dubai in UAE is becoming something like that. Iran used to be very open. There were a lot of traffic coming in and everything, and with the establishment of Islamic Republic, which we're going to talk more about that, things have changed quite a bit. But for example, a lot of the international visitors, they like to see UAE, they like to see Bahrain, Qatar to a degree, Kuwait somewhat, and then, of course, when they can, to Saudi Arabia. Yemen, as you know, it's very, very poor and doesn't have much of a tourism. Oman has not really fully developed its tourism, but that's it. The other one that usually has been a very nice place to visit is Iraq. But Iraq, going through sometimes troubles and everything, is not very attractive for a lot of it's not very attractive for a lot of tourists and everything. But Tehran used to be really the main attraction because it has all those historical parts and everything else. Okay, having said that, what I wanted to do, and look at why Iran is so important. Look at how much of a coastal line it has. It has 1,200, miles of coast. Okay, as opposed to like you see Iraq, 12 miles right there. As opposed to Kuwait, which is 120. So that brings more of an attention to that part of the world. So we talk about significant realities, success in terms of using the oil money, but oil money doesn't solve all the problems, guys. Okay, money doesn't solve all your problems. So there are a lot of problems. There are problems associated still with enough educated people to take position. In some areas, they have too many educated people, so there is like false sense of employment, because they want to make sure that all educated people they have a job, so nobody's going to complain or something, especially in the oil-rich countries. So there are challenges. There are, of course, some environmental challenges due to the fact that, let's face it, oil industry is a dirty industry. It creates a lot of pollution. You see, so this area used to be wonderful and very natural. I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to take us to some of the areas. You could snorkel and everything. Right now, sometimes in some areas you see a lot of pollution everywhere, and it's not something to write home about. But anyway, so enough about this one. Now let's move on to the next one, Iran. So Iran, as basically the regional superpower, has played a very important role. How? It has played a very important role because, as I mentioned, up to 1979 revolution, with the friendly Shah's regime, there was the closest relationship that the U.S. had in the region. On one side, Iran, on the other side, Israel. So Iran and Israel used to get the most advanced weapon systems, all right? Well, of course, after the revolution, things changed, So the problem after the revolution was that there were a lot of new problems for the regime, and we can talk about some of these, from economic one to security one to neighbors. And then the new regime has a record in some areas has succeeded originally, not right now, originally to disperse the power and make it more decentralized. And then when the Ayatollah Khamenei came to power, after Khomeini died, after the first decade of the revolution, things have started becoming highly centralized again. And then for a lot of people around the world, particularly Shiites, Iranian revolution has had some attraction. Oh, a little country stands up to this very powerful dictator who is so well supported by the U.S. But, here we go. Let's look at the reality of it. And we're going to talk about Iran more when we get into the country study. So I don't want to, necessarily make this lecture just about Iran. We are focusing on the role of Iran in the region. So in terms of, again, as I mentioned, for example, if I ask in the exam, like, what are some of the reasons for the fall of the Shah? I say mention 3 reasons, just like in exam 1 that, you would mention 3 factors for this, 3 factors. Here we go. The fall of Shah was associated with the fact that there was no democracy in Iran, the fact that his secret police were Savak, were playing a very significant role, and the gap between rich and poor, okay? Then here we go, one little further, again continuing with Iran. Well, after 1979 revolution, there is a new regime, okay? So what does new regime do? New regime actually has some problems too. No political institution to really promote participation, I mean, they talk about, oh yes, Iranians right now, they can vote and they couldn't do it before, but in terms of the candidates have to be all okay by, by the regime before they can actually run. So if they don't like you or you present ideas, which is very different, okay, they're not going to let you even be a candidate. So absence of the quality administration, many people who are running some of the ministries, they focused on the fact that, oh, these people are very good supporters of the regime. The person might not have any kind of clue in terms of how to run that administration. If it's a head of for example, the Ministry of Health or head of the Ministry of Labor or something, or trade, but, they are there because they are good supporters of so-and-so, okay? There is also class conflict. So class conflict that supposedly existed under Shah has not gone away. Also, there is the personal distrust. The regime, has created a situation in way that sometimes people, they don't trust their friends or even some family members, or, in terms of, hey, maybe this guy is going to report me to the regime. There is also a lot of corruption. So the corruption has not gone away and actually has got much worse. Anything you wanted to get done, even if it's a public service, you have to give some money here and there, is that right, to get the work done. And then there are also tribes and ethnic, cleavages. So Iran is a very large, place, which is the leftover of the Persian Empire, is that right? And there are a lot of tribes from Bakhtiaris and Qashqais and, Turkmens and Kurds and Lurs and everything else, that some of them have decided to live in cities, but guess what? Not everybody. Some of them, they still like that nomadic life, they move and everything. And regime feels insecure about that because they could, because of the technology they have in terms of hop on the horse or whatever and move from one place to another. The regime cannot control everybody, and that's what they want. And then the other part of it is because, they produce their own food. It's basically an army produces its own food and everything else. And if they want to act very, very independently, that can cause trouble for what? For the regime. Okay, what else? Continuation of that. One of the things we learn about the modern situation with Iran, and we talked about that again because it's such an influential, power in the Persian Gulf area. It has a fragile economy, which is basically depending on oil and gas. Okay, there is a whole notion of demoralized military. After the revolution, really, Ayatollah Khomeini didn't trust the Iranian regular forces. Okay, regular military. So what did he do? So he created, first of all, what they call Revolutionary Guard. In other words, the irregular forces, okay? And then he tries to demoralize the regular military because he didn't trust them, since in 1951, it was the Wad and 53 period when Mossadegh was Prime Minister of Iran. It was the Iranian military that made a coup and then brought Shah back. So Khomeini thought, I can't trust these people, is that right? But then when Iraq attacked Iran, is that right? We're going to talk about that one. Then here we go. They were basically getting rid of all the generals and all the top officials and everything. But then they came, in a way, Iran-Iraq war saved Iranian military to a degree. The role of the Shiites. Well, Shiites, remember, they're majority in Iran. Shiites are the main minority among the Muslim world. So from, let's say, more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, 10% of them are Shiites, 90% of them are Sunni, okay? And Iran is the most populous Shiite countries. After that is Iraq, then we have Azerbaijan, then we have Bahrain, and a couple of other ones. Okay. Of course, you know that there is Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is also representing the Shiite community of Lebanon. The cost of revolution. Well, the revolution maybe was very romanticized that, oh, wow, we did this. We stood up to the big powers, we did. But in reality, it caused a lot of problem for ordinary Iranians, Regime has a lot of enemies, not just outside, but also inside. There are people who do not like this regime because the regime is not very tolerant of different point of view. And last but not least, originally they tried to create a balance with their non-alignment policy toward both Soviet Union and U.S. Then Soviet Union disappeared in 1990 because revolution happened in 79. Is that right? So then they try to be, at least closer to some superpowers to neutralize the power of the U.S. in the region. Okay, what else? In terms of the new regime, we can say that they have had very small relative success in political areas, producing, presidents like Khatami. The current, president also is, more or less, what do you call it, Pezeshpur, he's more or less, moderate. But the question is, it's not who they are. What can they do? And that's sometimes when, people, they get really frustrated with the regime. Because even the moderates, they can't do very little because the conservatives are controlling things. So, economic problems, high inflation, really high inflation. We complain in the U.S. that our inflation was like about 8%, has gone down to 2.5%. These guys, they have 110, 120% inflation, sometimes 200, Goodness gracious, it's a different world. Then there is a lot of refugees. There are a lot of refugees coming from Afghanistan. There were a lot of refugees from Iraq. There are refugees from other parts of the world coming to Iran. And Iran is not getting any money from United Nations. So the regime has to pay and cover those. Foreign relations, of course, have had up and downs. Sometimes they are, when they have a moderate president that is allowed to make some improvement in relationship, they have better situation. It's up, sometimes it's down. Revolution appeal, as I mentioned, success, it's an example. So if we talk about what are the three factors associated with revolutionary appeal of Iran, here we go. Number one, success of a mass revolution, okay, which nobody thought is going to happen. Two, cutting foreign dependency. Iran was very much dependent on foreign countries, right? Now they produce a lot of stuff inside. So in a way, Iranian revolution has brought more sense of independence to Iran, okay? And then last but not least, of course, from the perspective of people like Ayatollah Khomeini or the current Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran has been, a very good example of the success of Islam, okay? So, here we go. Now, what can we say in terms of wars? Remember these three major wars over there. One was Iran-Iraq War, which was from 1980 to 88. Then the Gulf War, liberation of Kuwait, 1990 to 1991. And then we have had in 2003, basically what? Invasion of, Iraq. Then in these cases, we can say that at least during the time that Iraq was under the, leadership of President Saddam Hussein, was basically aggressive. It was, in reality, it was Iraq that attacked Iran. And Iran came to the United Nations and everywhere else and said, look, these guys have attacked us. But because nobody liked the Iranian regime, they didn't really help them. So pretty much the whole world, from the Soviet Union at the time to US, everybody was helping Iraq. The only countries that they showed some friendship toward Iran, one was Syria under Assad, and then the other one was Gaddafi, Libya's Gaddafi, So those were the only two that they showed some kind of, soft side for Iran. Gaddafi died after the, when the, Arab Spring made it to Libya and led to the conflicts and things like that, and the civil war, and he was captured and killed. And you know that Syria, after the General Assad passed away, his son Bashir has been taking the charge. And when spring, Arab Spring came, the internal, domestic politics of that one changed in such a way that it didn't bring some improvement, but it kind of divided the country between the people who supported the regime and people who didn't in some of the other regions of Syria. So Iraq was the aggressor, but when Iraq attacked Iran, kind of the world kind of clapped, good job, When Iraq attacked Kuwait, okay, and that was over some of these islands and the oil things over there, it was suddenly a no-no. And then we had obviously two wars over there, the liberation of Kuwait in 1991, and then later on when the Bush administration, Bush Jr. Found, or they felt like Iraq is developing nuclear and biological and chemical weapons or something, they attacked it in 2003. I never forget that because I was actually on sabbatical from UCF and I was stationed, helping the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait. And then they would ask me to travel to some of these countries, including Iran, and see what's going on, what's the political environment. I will tell you more about these things at the end, when we talk about that, when I have some pictures to actually show you. So you know that I'm not just making some claims. The Gulf War, which is known as the Gulf War, is a very, very general term. I prefer you use a very specific term. So don't refer to all of them as Gulf War. The Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War of liberation of Kuwait, the Gulf War of invasion of Iraq. So that would make it a little bit more specific. Then here we go with Iraq as an aggressor, Iraq surprise attack against Iran, Iraqi supports from, as you might mention before. These are things that I mentioned. I'm just highlighting it because I know a lot of students, they say, Dr. Said, it is so much information. Is there please some way that you can organize it for us so we can see the big picture? Here we go. Our PowerPoints are basically your study guide. Is that right? So Iraqi supports from USSR, US, and even Arab countries. And then the cost of the war, not just in human terms, and also resources, and then the US-Iraq relationship until Ambassador Glaspie, and that's something that I've tried to do actually some research about it myself, but she's not available. April Glaspie is not available for any kind of interviews because they say that before Iraq attacked, Kuwait, the Saddam Hussein has asked the American ambassador that if there is a conflict between two Arab states, and what would be the position of the U.S. And then there is a rumor that Ambassador Glaspie has said, well, United States would remain neutral, and there is a rumor that no, this is not what she said. Well, if she said United States would remain neutral, that would be considered a green light for Saddam Hussein to go and invade now Kuwait. You see, and then of course you know what has happened after that. But there is something else, there are rumors also to the opposite as well. So we do not know. That's why I wanted to research it, okay? So, but it's a very difficult subject to do. And as I mentioned about the Gulf War, be very careful when you use that term. So in terms of the Gulf War, you need to consider pro and anti forces in the U.S. Positive side of the Gulf War has been that bringing the Madrid conference, which brought the very first time the Arab states and Israel tried to use that, because if you remember, all the Arab states, including, Israelis, they didn't, actually do anything, because Bush administration, if you remember, Saddam Hussein threw some, bunch of, Scud missiles toward Israel. And Israel, Israel, as soon as it gets hit, it hits back, and it hits even more. But Bush administration, they had a lot more influence on Israel than the current administrations do right now, because they told them that, look, we do not want you to interfere. We give you some Patriot missiles and things like that to defend yourself. You stay over there, because they're afraid if Israel attacks Iraq, that coalition that the Bush administration has built to get rid of Saddam Hussein is going to fall apart. Okay, and that was very well done in that regard. Then preservation of Kuwait. This is during the Bush Senior. Bush Senior believed that states, they should remain what they are and who they are. And in that regard, the definition for our military was very clear, that we are going to push all the Iraqis outside Kuwait's what? Natural territory. All right? And we stop right there. In that war in 1991, we didn't go inside Iraq. We just pushed them out. Okay? Next one. Reduction of the Iraqi military. Even, when the Iraqi military was in retrieve from Kuwait, it was, ordered, by the higher echelon that try to kill as many and destroy as much of the Republican, guards of the, Iraq as possible. So on their roads away from Kuwait all the way to get to the border, they basically bombarded them and they killed a lot of them to reduce the power of Iraq. So Iraq could not do something like that again. The negative side of it was Saddam regime, still survived after that war. And Saddam identified who are his opposition inside his own country. And he started destroying them. And then that led into a lot of refugees leaving Iraq. And then when they left Iraq, where did they go? They went to Iran, okay, because they were the Shiite. And then also a lot of environmental damage. Okay, so how do we end this discussion? By saying that there are three strategies in that regard in terms of political strategies of political development in this region. One is repression that both Iran and Iraq have used. One is revision, which Saudi Arabia and Bahrain have used. And one is reform, which Kuwait and what UAE have done. So in terms of the political development, we can say that there were organizations, even a local organization called GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, which was established in 1981. The reason of it, people, they think that, it was because of this and that and Iran. It wasn't just because of Iran, because, the Saudi Arabia, is that right? One of the major powers right there, okay? One of the big boys of the region, decided to organize the other countries, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, to get together because they were not only afraid of Iranian revolutionary rhetoric coming over there, but also they did not truly trust Saddam Hussein either, So that was one of the reasons. And then, of course, during the failures of it, one during the Iran-Iraq war, GCC tried to bring some kind of mediation. It was not able to do that. GCC during the Kuwait, invasion of Kuwait, what did GCC do? Nothing, they couldn't do anything to defend Kuwait. Really, the people who saved Kuwait was what? United States and its allies. And then the current function of it, very frankly, it started as a security organization, but they've been basically mostly doing what? Economic activities. And the only security is like border area or something like that. Even though all of them, they have a lot of very good equipment. What can we say about, in terms of the conclusion of our topic? Persian Gulf is very important, mostly because of the oil. Remember, the Persian Gulf oil is important for three reasons. Number one is the quality. It has the lowest level of sulfur and other junk in it. Number two, if I would put a map of the Persian Gulf, oil fields, you would see most of them are so close to the Persian Gulf itself, okay? So it's not like really far away. The one around Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all of them are so close. Makes the transportation easy. All you do is you dig a hole on the ground, you pipe it to the nearest port, okay? And what? Very easy, very close to international, destination, international market. So quality of it, not too far away from the Gulf, and then transportation, very easy to what? To tankers. And until the world really depends on oil and natural gas, this area is going to be significant. Okay. I hope you enjoyed reading that section. I hope you enjoyed the articles. And if you have any question, as always, what do? You email me. I'm always available for you. You take care. Bye.